Today is December 9th, and I'm Kathy Bernstein. I have the privilege and the honor to be interviewing my boss, Richard Meyer, and we're doing
Oh,
this.
you can call me Rick.
Oh, thanks, Rick. We're doing this as part of our capturing the Milwaukee Jewish community for 350 years of Jewish life in America. And Rick, you've done these yourself many times. I'm just going to, you know the questions as well as I do, but let's go through them anyway because we need to find out something about you. I don't know a lot about you. So let's start out, I know your name, and I know you weren't born in Milwaukee, so why don't we go back that way, talk a little about your parents, if they were born here, grandparents,
Sure.
and that.
I'm Rick Meyer, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to do this, especially with you, Kathy. I know it's a labor of love for you. I was born in Los Angeles. I'm 51 years old, and born and raised there, which people find interesting, especially from the Midwest.
Why?
Oh, because no one thinks anybody was born in Los Angeles. We're all transplants, but
Oh.
I was born and raised there. And my parents, my father was born in the States in New York, though his parents come from Bohemia, what is better known as Czechoslovakia, which doesn't exist anymore as an independent country. And he came here, and he was born here, as I said, in New York in 1914. And my mother is from Germany, as is her family, of course, from Stuttgart, southern Germany. They came to America right after Kristallnacht in November, late November of 1938, among the last Jews to get out legally. My grandfather had the prescience to think about what was going on there and had some relatives here and had business dealings in the States that allowed him to get a visa. And they came, as I said, in the end of 38, beginning of 39, when my mother was about 13 or 14. And they settled first in San Francisco and then moved to Los Angeles.
Why did they go so far west?
It's a good question. I think the reason they ended up in the West Coast was that there was a family member in the West Coast, and also that my grandfather thought he might have better business opportunities there than other parts of the States. He was involved in women's clothing, undergarments and the like, and had a family business in Stuttgart, and with his brothers. And so he wanted to try to do some of that when he got here, though as it turned out, his health and other circumstances didn't really allow for it once he arrived in the States. The interesting anecdote that I was always told about my grandfather was that he was a very good business person, and I went, later on in life, I went on a trip to Europe and I tracked down on Friedrichstrasse their house that they lived in. They were fairly well-to-do and affluent in Germany. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, didn't get to, darn it, perpetuate that here in the States. Mm-hmm. And they, after the war, there was reparations that the German government was forced to pay, and my grandparents were receiving some of that. And in that process, their house had been sold or taken over by the Nazi government and then resold, and an individual in, I think it was 1954, was buying the house. It was a beautiful mansion, and wanted to offer my grandfather, in lieu of cash, stock in a kind of a fledgling, re-emerging company in Germany. And my grandfather, who was a bit of an investor, said at the time, "I don't think so," basically because he didn't want to have anything to do with Germany anymore. So he said, "I'll take whatever the cash was going to be, some small amount." And the company was Mercedes-Benz. And so, it was one of those little mistakes of life.
Well, so what did, so the business failed here, so what did he do then to support your mother, and was she an only child, or?
No, I had, he passed away, an uncle, my mother's younger brother, mm-hmm. And they lived together with their parents, my grandparents, in the Fairfax area of Los Angeles, a very Jewish neighborhood. My mother went to Fairfax High School and became an American very quickly. He consciously became one. My mm-hmm. grandfather did odds and ends, basically, some sales kind of work and things of that nature. Began a little investing with what little funds that they had, he had some, challenging physical and emotional problems that he had to deal with throughout his life, and it made it hard for him to really start a business. I think it was a result of, the life and of what happened, dislocation from Germany.
Yeah.
And my mother became wanted to be a Yankee, really became an American. In fact, if people talk to her now, they would never have known, even though she was 14, 15 when she left Germany. She can hardly remember the language, no accent. She came here in America around the same time that Henry Kissinger did, and of course he cultivated his accent.
Yeah.
And she's an American all the way.
So they got a little bit of reparations for how many years?
Oh gosh, I think up until through the 60s or 70s, received that, and that helped them support themselves.
And your father was born here, you said, and so what did his father?
My grandfather would have done well to work actually in Milwaukee, in that he was a tool and die maker.
Mm-hmm.
He worked with his hands. He was I remember him well. He lived till he was about 96 years of age, and he was a very strict, stern person of high ethical values, and the old expression, never spare the rod, I think was part of his backbone in raising a family. He moved to America, I think in the 1890s or maybe 1900. Found his wife here, got married in New York. His first wife, my father's mother, died in childbirth. He remarried shortly thereafter, and the woman I consider my grandmother, or my father's stepmother, was really his mother. They lived in New York, and he was somewhat Prussian in orientation. He was a sort of a Austrian wannabe. Bohemia was the poor person's Austria, and so he kind of fancied himself a Prussian, though he really wasn't. And he had that bearing about him for all the years. And he did tool and die work in New York, and then they moved to California following my father's move after the war. My father was a soldier in the Seabees in World War II, and after the war he came to California, land of opportunity, in I think it was 45, 46, and shortly thereafter brought out his parents, my grandparents, to live and retire in LA.
Meyer, that was your name. No name change? Yes, name change?
No.
Does it
The
mean
spelling might have
anything?
been different. Well, Meyer from German, Meyer,
Mayor.
and
Is that what it means? Mayor means mayor?
it really does, yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that. We may do something with last names, what they mean. I think it'd be kind of a fun thing.
It really would be, and it will help. It's another way of determining, where a community comes from. There's a lot of similarities.
Right. I found out that Sager means clock today. That's what I was told. Okay. What about you? And you were born, and did you grow up? What was your Jewish background and school, and what kind of kid were you anyway? And be honest.
I don't want that to get back to our colleagues in the office.
Come on.
Well, as I said, I was born in 1953 in Los Angeles, a part of Los Angeles called Westchester. I mention that only because not very Jewish, it's by the LA airport, and grew up in a fairly Gentile community, but by and large accepting. My early recollections of being Jewish are in two distinctly separate ways. The first was in my neighborhood when I was a young kid of 5, 6, 7. I remember around Christmas time walking up and down the street for whatever reason, and I would see Christmas trees in the houses of all of our neighbors, and I would have this pang of fill in the blank, oh, why can't we celebrate, or the other people have something really more enjoyable to do or special. Our family identified Jewishly, but didn't participate all that much, and it wasn't table conversation or an integral part of my sister. I have an older sister, and my upbringing. So I remember that dichotomy of feeling, and at the same time, and I've asked my parents about it. I've done some chronicling of my family's history a little bit, learning that from you and some folks in town here with genealogy. And we had a dinner time conversation a number of years ago, and I asked my parents about something that happened years earlier. When my sister and I were growing up in this non-Jewish neighborhood, in which there were 2 synagogues in town, in the community, we were members of a Reformed congregation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, and still, notwithstanding my conversation with my parents, I'm not certain about why we were a member of a congregation, other than my parents thought it was important to make a statement that you're Jewish, and that's the way you do it. You join a synagogue. We were members of a synagogue. It was not a wonderful experience. The family was probably once a year Jews, high holidays, but my parents sent my sister and I to a religious school. We hated it. We rebelled every week against going to Sunday school.
Right.
And
Was it on Sunday?
And it was on Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
It was Sunday school. The rabbi was a misanthropic individual. Hard to imagine a rabbi being that way, but he was.
Mm-hmm.
He was a brilliant scholar, wrote books, but he didn't get along well with people.
Sounds like somebody.
There are, maybe we both know some of those folks
Mm-hmm.
who will remain nameless in our fair city. But nonetheless, we went to Sunday school, hated it, and at every opportunity, we were sick, we didn't want to go, we didn't want to get up. Finally, my parents had enough of that. They quit the synagogue. One would have thought that would have been the end of it, but they looked around for another temple to join, and they found a synagogue called Wilshire Boulevard Temple, which is a well-known West Coast synagogue, a classic German Reformed congregation, not too dissimilar in some respects historically to Emanuel B'nai Sherin here in Milwaukee. And we joined that synagogue, and that had an amazing immediate effect upon me because it was a wonderful place, very open, very engaging, notwithstanding it had 2,600 families, a massive place. But everybody was nice. The rabbis were nice. The staff was nice. And it was like, the window had been open and fresh air came through, and I breathed it in and had a great experience at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, and that kind of helped me along my path towards Jewish involvement to an extent.
How old were you then when that happened? Do you know?
Yeah, I was no older than 9 years of age.
Interesting, but how smart of your parents that they didn't care, but evidently they felt that it was important for you and your sister.
Yeah, there was something
That's
going on for them.
Something, yeah, interesting.
Because they maintained once a year Judaism in the family, for the family.
Mhm.
But we went to religious school. The synagogue itself was very much ahead of its time. One of its 3 rabbis, that large, it had 3 rabbis. Its number 2 rabbi had created a few years earlier, before we joined, a residential camp as part of the synagogue. Stroke of brilliance. It held the membership together by offering summer activities for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And a few years into my membership at the synagogue, my parents signed me up to go to the summer camp, and I went, and that was wonderful. And residential camping is one of the 3 pillars of Jewish identity formation,
Right.
as we say,
Mm-hmm.
and it played that role for me. So that brought me in. I did youth grouping at the temple, became president of the youth group, did assistant teaching in the religious school when I went through a bar mitzvah, and then after that confirmation, and went through the mill of what was offered in the synagogue, and had great experiences along the way.
I was just going to ask you what kind of kid you were.
I was
You're telling me a lot by that, but how would you describe yourself?
I was a precocious child, someone who had a lot of different interests but had some trouble focusing. I was very social. I loved sports. I liked groups, being in groups.
Then where was the focus problem?
Well,
Studies or?
Being an attentive listener,
Mm-hmm.
and setting my mind to something, and being up until I was in 7th grade, so I guess that's about 12, 13 years
Yeah.
of age. The teacher said that I hadn't met my potential in school,
Mm-hmm.
and then something happened. I think maybe it was a good teacher, or just the stars were aligned. But I started settling down, and did pretty well in school,
Mm-hmm.
and in other activities too.
So you were active in Jewishly and non-Jewishly in your school. Then in high school,
No, growing up, I had friends in the neighborhood, but I was never really active in high school. In high school, extracurricular activities or school activities, with the exception of I did sports and enjoyed sports, but most of my social activity was actually through my synagogue. And I separate them out because the synagogue was 30 minutes away from home, and that's a big distance than even in LA where people travel. And so my friends were from a different part of town, and so I had some social, casual friends from school, but most of my relationships and friendships were in the Jewish community, which was away from where I lived.
Right.
And I think that had a lot to do with me continuing to do what I do now. So that's how it was.
So your parents didn't, they were once a year Jews. Did your mother, or did you have candles, Shabbos, any of that? No.
Oh, no.
Well, I mean, some people even,
Absolutely
they do.
not. Absolutely,
no
people
candlelight,
did.
Yeah, no
No,
candlelight.
we didn't light the candles.
Pesach, Seder.
We did do a Seder, absolutely.
Okay,
and we had a high holiday ritual, which was we had extended family in LA, and I remember until I was 15, 16, 17, 18, every high holiday after services, we would drive around as a family and visit the elders, the next generation.
Yeah.
It was lovely. I miss that. I've talked to my children about that because we don't have that, nuclear and extended family close by.
Right.
And that was wonderful. But other than synagogue membership and the things that were youth grouping and camps that went with it, I didn't have, other direct Jewish experiences through and even past college.
Did your mom work?
Only in the later years of my father's employment and following his retirement did she work part-time.
What'd she do?
She worked for a bank. She worked for a bank. She did customer relations and other things, as assistant teller work. She was already a bit older, and so her skill sets were a bit more limited, but she enjoyed it, got her out of the house. She had done some door-to-door sales work with Avon younger
really?
on, but she was a stay-at-home mother and very devoted. My father was worked in purchasing, and neither of my parents are college educated. Good street smarts, and they understood the American way, and they wanted to be contributing members, and they did it according to the best of their abilities. I came from a working-class family.
Right. They had moxie, as we would say.
Moxie, but not entrepreneurial moxie. They had moxie to the extent that they knew they wanted to succeed, but within the system, I don't think they challenged the boundaries. They were good, law-abiding. They are good law-abiding, tax-paying Democrats, and wanted to always do what was right by their family and the community within the bounds of what they had, and they were always working middle class.
How much older is your sister, and where was she in your growing up? And were you close, and are you close?
That's a good question. That's one I didn't ask in my interviews with
Well,
folks.
honey, I make up questions.
As you go along.
I do indeed.
Well, we don't have all day here now. My sister is about 3.5 years older than me. She's a teacher in Southern California, where she still lives. And we were not close growing up.
She's been here a couple times. I think I've met her.
You have. She does visit. We're much closer now. Let's see. Her stories would be the time that I locked her in the bathroom.
Of course.
Mine would be the time she hit me over the head with a baseball bat.
Did she? Did you get a concussion?
I was dazed and confused. Some people still think I might be. And we weren't that close, very different personalities. It wasn't easy for her, whether it be first child or the strictness of my parents or whatever it might have been. And she hasn't had an easy time of it, but fortunately, her life has improved greatly in the last number of years. She's married to her second husband. He's a wonderful guy who adores her.
Great.
Which is wonderful for her. And give her all the credit in the world. She's always, always tried to be a working person and someone who, is forward-looking as best she can. And it's good stuff now between us.
You went to college, and did you always know what you wanted to do, or not? Or did you think you wanted to be something else?
Absolutely.
What did you want to be?
I wanted to be a lawyer. I did go to college. I knew...
Well, I know also we have to tell the camera that you just got your honorary PhD.
Thank you. Yes, that's true.
Yes?
That's true.
So what happened to law?
Well, I went to school in California. I didn't have the resources, nor was it something in my vocabulary to think that I could have gone somewhere else to school, because I didn't have the modeling of my parents.
Right.
And my sister had gone to school, dropped out to put her then husband through school. So I knew I was going to go to college. I ended up doing very well in high school, and so I applied to go to one of the UC, University of California schools, UCLA, and I did go to UCLA.
Did you get a scholarship?
No, I didn't get a scholarship.
Didn't need
I didn't
one?
apply for a scholarship, actually. What happened was I lived at home, which is unfortunate. You don't get the full college experience.
Yeah.
I always regretted that, but that's what it was.
That's what it was.
And I worked 20, 25 hours a week and went to school.
What did you do?
I worked in a print shop.
Did you sell shoes? So many people sold shoes.
That's interesting, though, not to digress too much. My mother's side of the family, one of her uncles was a shoe manufacturer of a very well-known, now out-of-business company. They merged, called Marks and Newman. And they had shoes like Amalfi and Bandolino, which people have heard of. So I did a couple of summers go to New York, and I was a gopher and all that.
Oh, that's
I raised some
fun.
extra money during the summers, but no, I didn't work in the shoe business.
Okay.
I did, just odds and ends. I've been working since I'm 12 years old. Paper routes, ice cream parlors. It's what it is. I have a good work ethic. So I worked my way through college, and I was going to be a lawyer. I was a political science major, and I had a transformative experience that changed my career path and
What was
puts
it?
me where I am today. I decided that I wanted to study abroad. I had friends at school who were picking places to go in their junior year abroad. And I said, this would be a nice thing to do. Boy, I can get credit at school, go somewhere else. It's about the same cost, except that I have to pay room and board. I had saved some money, and I said, I'd like to do it. My parents said, well, if you want to do it, that's fine. And I don't know why. To this day, I still don't know why, but I picked Israel to study in for the year abroad. I had never been to Israel. I had never thought about going to Israel.
Well, were you in a youth group or anything like that?
I was in a youth group, but the youth group wasn't a Zionist youth group,
No.
and we hadn't done anything programming around Israel. I was only 13, 14 at the time of the Six-Day War, so that wasn't a great memory either way to me. But I decided to go to Israel, and again, maybe it's serendipity or being beshert, who knows. And I went to Israel, and what was transformative about it, and who could have ever known, was I was there for a year. I arrived in July of 1973, and of course October was the Yom Kippur War, so I was there during the war, and I stayed after, and that really, changed my path, because I think living in any country at war, you learn so much more about the country, its people, its ethos, everything, what it stands for, and it solidified a lifelong relationship to and commitment to Israel. I'm an Israelophile by virtue of that, and that caused me to reassess what I wanted to do in my life. I had, as I said, been tracking towards being a lawyer. Came back to the States after living in Israel. Finished.
Were you gone a year?
I was gone a year.
The junior year abroad.
Junior year abroad program. Traveled after that through Europe with some friends. So I was gone like 14 months.
Excuse me, but what program were you part of?
Well, there are many year abroad or junior year abroad programs.
Where were
They're
you
either
at?
sponsored by the host university. In this
Right.
case, University of California sponsored my program. I didn't go on an independent. I didn't research like they do today. Programs are other. My daughter is going next month on a junior semester abroad, and she's not doing it through Madison, where she goes to school. She went on the internet and found a program that Madison will accept.
Right.
This was hand-fed.
University?
I went to Hebrew University.
Uh-huh.
The University of California, which has 8 campuses, had an office in Israel. It was wonderful. They took great care of us. And I was in the program for the year, and with wonderful supervision and a tremendous group of friends who developed. A war brings people together, as I said, and I've developed lifelong friendships with some people who've really achieved a lot, because maybe it was the year, who knows. And I came back, finished my undergraduate degree in political science at UCLA, and something in the back of my mind said, maybe law isn't for you. Why go into something that you're not certain of? And so I took a couple of years off, and I did a lot of different things. I was a tennis instructor. I worked for a travel agency and led tour groups for a couple summers through Europe and Israel.
I didn't know that.
I was the director of the Hebrew department of my religious school at our synagogue. The religious school was directed by somebody else, because the religious school had several thousand kids in it.
Sure.
The Hebrew department had 600 kids, and I directed that for 2 years. And all those things, and at the same time, I started exploring what a Jewish community has to offer, because there was something there that said, Jewish community is a good place to be. And so I heard about an organization called the Los Angeles Jewish Federation Council.
Mm-hmm.
I applied my senior year of college for a scholarship there to give me some money for school. I was declined for that. The next year I applied for a kind of an internship. After I had graduated, I received an internship to work in that federation for its youth department, which did high school and college services.
Oh.
And that year got me thinking, I like this kind of work. I like what it has to offer. And so I decided to go back to graduate school and be trained in the field to help me work professionally in communal service. So I made that decision, and again, I can't say it was the most thought out. I applied for one school only, or one dual program that was in effect back then. Hebrew Union College from the Jewish Institute of Religion, the Reform
Mm-hmm.
Movement School. They have a campus in LA.
Mm-hmm.
An MA program in Jewish communal service, and across the street, the University of Southern California had a social work degree, MSW. It was a dual master's program. You had to get accepted on both, or you couldn't go to either. And at the same time, I applied to the then Council of Jewish Federations. It's called the United Jewish Communities now.
Mhm.
They had a scholarship program to train Federation professionals. I applied for that, and I said, I hope it works out. If I get accepted in all three, I'll do it. If I only get accepted in one of the three, I won't do it at all. And I'll probably go back to law school.
Mhm.
And I got accepted, and the rest, as they say, is history. I've gone
Mhm.
into the field.
Interesting. It's one of our questions, who was a role model for you? Growing up, who was a role model for you in Israel? I mean, like, who really put you, was there one person, or was it just the time?
The experience of Israel was the role
That
model
was,
for
okay,
me. It
and
wasn't an individual.
What about when you were in college? I know that one of your teachers was this Jerry Bubis, I think. Was he influential, or was there someone else, or you just did this on your, you just were really motivated and inspired from within?
Well, I
And
think
did you have a mentor?
Well, I have had mentors,
Tell me who they are.
and the inspiration, I think, was more environmental than
Okay.
individual. If I keep my train of thought, I'll go back to your first question, though,
Mhm.
about who at a younger age had influence. My grandfathers,
Both of them?
both sets of grandparents, and a loving family with all the mishigash that families have.
Yeah.
But all my grandparents, in various ways, grandmothers and grandfathers, had an influence on me, from how they comported themselves, to their love of family, to the way they tried to take care of each other. Those were important role models. The sweetness of my mother's father, despite his personal travails, just a lovely human being, someone who's just nice to be around.
Mhm.
My other grandfather and my father, from the standpoint of just, this is the way things are supposed to be, fulfill your obligations, do the right thing.
Mhm.
Those are important values to me. My mother, who is always been someone who is was always outgoing and enjoyable to be around, very social and easy to make conversation with. And those were all things that helped me. But the rest of my development professionally and in terms of my career path and whatnot I think it was just circumstantial. Good experience at a synagogue, as I said before.
Yeah, right.
Being in Israel when I was, being around the people that I was. Jerry Bubis was a great director of that program, and I saw someone with passion and vision in his persona. We weren't close personally.
Mhm.
I would say that professionally, there's an individual who was my first supervisor professionally. In graduate school, I had a very good supervisor in each of my years of field work. One was a family service director, and I learned a lot about counseling, and I learned a lot about organizational life and things of that nature. Then my second year, I worked for a federation, the assistant director in that federation, and from him I learned about discipline and about taking minutes, actually, how to run meetings and things of that nature.
Those are important
Or
tools.
important tools of our trade.
You bet.
My first professional mentor was a gentleman by the name of Jay Jacobson.
And who was he?
He was then the campaign director of the Federation in Minneapolis, where I first worked after graduate school. I moved to Minneapolis and worked there for 5 years, and he was my supervisor all the way until he left. And he's probably one of the 2 or 3 best fundraisers that I've ever known, and I learned a lot from him.
Good for you.
Oh.
Good for him.
Yeah, good for both of us. And,
Right.
And then one of our colleagues here, Bob Aronson, even though we were more peers, he was a peer mentor. I learned a lot about how one can carry oneself and be effective in the job, about personal style,
Right.
and so he's been a mentor too.
When did you and Paula get married? I mean, like, where were you in the schooling and all
Sure.
of that?
I met my first wife, Paula Simon, when we were in graduate school. She was in the same program, and we got married about a half year after we graduated, after I had decided to move, and Paul agreed that we would move to Minneapolis, and then we got married back in Los Angeles. So that was in 1979.
And when was Mara born?
Well, Mara was born in 1983
In Minneapolis?
in Minneapolis. She lived there
Right.
with us for 12 months, and then we moved here. And my other child with Paula was Jamie, was born in 1987, and Zachary, of course, my youngest child,
Right.
with my wife Gail. Was
When did
born.
you and Gail get married? I have no
Uh-oh.
sense of this at all.
We might have to edit. No, I gotta get it right. We were married in 1996.
In 1996, and Zach
Will be 7 in January.
Oh my God.
He was born in 1998.
When you were in Minneapolis, and of course you learned, and you were there 5 years, and you worked in campaign, did you always want to be a director of a federation? I mean, was that your goal when you were in graduate school? Did you think that was the place to be? Did you want to go and be the head of JDC, or did you?
Well, I knew I wanted to work in Jewish communal service
Right.
going in.
And you didn't want to be a social worker? Did you want to head up a JFS or anything like that? Did you think?
Well, I am a social worker, Kathy.
No, but I mean, did you want to social work?
No,
case
I
work.
learned, and in fact, I knew that I was going to work in federations. Why? Because I got this scholarship from Council of Jewish Federation, and one of the requirements was that you have to work for a certain period of time.
Okay, that's
So I
good.
knew I was going to do that, and that was fine with me because I thought, as best I could at a young age, that my skill sets and interests were best applied through the broadest community, and to me, federation represented the broadest aspects of Jewish community life. I consciously, in my first year of field work, chose to work in a setting other than a federation so I could learn about the interactions and about how other organizations, other disciplines within communal service operate. And I worked in a family service agency so I could learn about counseling, counselors.
Oh, so you did do that, huh?
I did that my first year. I worked for a Jewish family service agency, and I learned 2 things that are invaluable to me at that point in time. The first was tremendous respect for counselors, the counseling process, what counselors do, how they do it, and the skill sets involved. I've maintained that level of respect ever since. And the second thing I learned is I could never be a counselor.
It's hard work.
Very hard work, and they do and know things that I only can dream of.
Of course, your job isn't easy. You come on, don't shrug like that. You and I both know that it isn't. It has its pluses and it has its minuses, and sometimes I think that sitting in the hot seat in which you find yourself, I know enough about it to know that you must have 1 or 2 sleepless nights sometimes. But you seem to have thrived under it. I can't imagine. And in the meantime, since you came to Milwaukee and you became the campaign director here, and then when Bob left, Bob Aronson, you became the director. What have you done to, in the non-Jewish world, to keep some balance in your life? Because it's very easy to get gobbled up and be only Jewish.
It is. And I can't say that I've been as successful in that balance as I would have liked and still would like to. And in fact, I'm recently, Kathy, as all of us in the Federation, developing our personal performance review plans for the year ahead. I'm doing that right now too, soon with the officers. And on the personal side, I wrote down very recently that I want to improve my professional personal balance This work can gobble you up, there's no doubt about it. It's a labor of love, and it's beyond just work. When you put the words Jewish in front of the profession, or Jewish in front of the word volunteer, whether you're a professional or volunteer, it changes the terms of engagement. And for those who aren't involved, it's so difficult to explain that, and once you get involved, you realize it. And I've found that to be the case for me too. You know, what I don't get to do as many things in areas that I used to have an interest in because of the nature
Like what?
of the work. Politics.
Oh,
I've always enjoyed politics.
Have
The politics I do now are job-related,
yeah, I understand.
clearly, as opposed to the broader community. That's an area that I had an interest in.
Music?
Always loved music. I was in a band when I was growing up, and don't get to play music as much as I had liked to do.
Did you
Travel.
play an instrument?
I do and did indeed.
What, guitar?
Yes.
Oh,
I still love music to listen to,
yeah, I know you do.
but I'm not involved in performance. So those things, unfortunately, and travel, I'd like to travel, but circumstances have conspired against that as much as I would have liked. Reading, for the joy of pure reading, the balance there. Now, much of that is my own responsibility. You know, I have to take responsibility for what I do and don't do. But having said that, there are give and takes to the type of work that I'm involved in. What I try to do for the balance is still keep my hands in other areas other than the Jewish community. Some because they benefit my work in the Jewish community, and some because I think it's important to give back beyond
Like
just
what?
I'm on the board of a major healthcare system in town, Aurora Healthcare. I'm on their board. I've been involved in the Milwaukee Forum. The Milwaukee Forum is when I was involved, I've graduated out of it, but it was a group of business, government, social welfare, and other up-and-coming types that you have to be nominated, elected to, and they get together to explore community issues and see if they can work together to improve the quality of life in the community. So those have been some things that I've done.
We're in the middle, or we're about to begin, or actually we're in the middle of the beginning of our capital campaign. And of course, one of the questions that we have here is, how do you see the present and future of the Milwaukee Jewish community? And I would like if you would give, if you can, give a really honest appraisal, not, what we could put in the Chronicle. I mean, what worries you, Rick, about our community? If you
Kathy,
tell me there's nothing, then I worry.
We can end the interview. Well, let's see. Should if I know that this is going to put in the time capsule and not looked at for a while, no. I think you know me well enough to know that notwithstanding my position, sometimes it gets me into trouble. I'm pretty honest about things, and I'll try to be in response to that question. We live in a great community, and I've done some of these interviews, and everyone says that, and it is true. And I wouldn't have stayed in Milwaukee as long as I have if I didn't personally enjoy it and derive a tremendous personal and Jewish benefit from being here. And
Of course.
it's a great place to raise a family. The family values are right up there. So it's a wonderful Jewish community. I believe it's going to continue to be a wonderful Jewish community. But we do have big issues.
What are your issues?
Well, the first is a demographic issue, and that is we're not growing and we're shrinking. And just from a standpoint of infrastructure and what it takes to support a community, you got to have a certain size to continue to have the breadth and quality of programs and services that a community like Milwaukee has offered, continues to offer, we hope will continue to have available. And I'm not certain if we're going to be able to continue that, and therefore, if that's the case, we're going to have to manage expectations and manage not just expectations of what we provide and what people expect to be provided, but do that in a competitive environment when people have so much more choice before them.
Yeah.
It's a tremendous challenge and balancing act. And therefore, we have to find paths towards quality engagement with members of the Jewish community, things that resonate for them, what's important, to draw them in and keep them connected so that that core will have such a fervor. I can only put it in those terms, fervor for what they're doing, why they're doing what they're doing, what they believe in, that core will emanate this aura that draws other people in. Without that, without individualizing it for people, without finding what's really important, whether it be at a spiritual level, a cultural level, something close to your heart, the museum concept, bringing people in different ways than we have in the past, I'm fearful that the community will continue to be a strong community, but will fray a little bit more at the edges and not be as close-knit, and that will be a challenge. Financially, the same way we have to manage expectations, because we have we provide services today and do things that communities larger than us could only dream of, and the question is, can we maintain that high level with the finances that are available? I'm concerned about that. The product, what we have to offer, that hasn't changed. I don't think it will. And notwithstanding the sociology of younger members of the community versus older members, how they look at their philanthropy and their volunteerism, these are cyclical, and the macro trends, intermarriage, assimilation, they are cyclical. I believe they run their course. In Jewish life, I'm a student of Jewish history, none of the issues that we face today are different than or new relative to issues 1, 2, 3, 4 generations past. It's the way we deal with those issues that has to change. And, I'm looking for thoughtful, engaged leadership to address them. So my biggest concern is the demographics and managing expectations about what kind of community we can be.
What about the number of, or let me ask it a different way. You mentioned something about cyclical and so on and so forth, and I'm thinking about all of the agencies that we have, all of, not just Federation, I mean everything. Do you think that some of them are going to go out of business and should? And I won't ask you which ones, but...
Yes, yeah. I do believe
they will and they should, or they should and they will?
They definitely should at some point in time. Agencies and core services run their course. And either the agency changes its focus and continues with a different core purpose, that can happen successfully.
Right.
Or it, or with the community's help, the courage should be provided to help that agency, especially if it's within the family, so to speak, make the strategic and difficult decisions of going out of business, if you want to put it in those stark terms.
It is, sort of like old soldiers never die, but Jewish community organizations, some of them don't want to die, I think sometimes too, and I think it's interesting when I sit and look at it, and I wonder if you feel like I do, that some of them should and go out of business.
Well, whether they want to or not,
right,
and change is so difficult, personally,
sure, organizationally,
for communities, but it's the only constant, and it's also something we have to embrace to continue to be relevant. And, we're trying. The Federation, is sort of like a battleship. We can change directions, but we don't change like a speedboat.
No.
So we hope people will stay with us as we change course, and we have, and we'll continue to do that. Change for the Federation is evolutionary; it's not revolutionary. And aside from the cliches, we continue to look at ourselves differently, and we'll try to help those organizations, to need to sunset or change how they operate, and hopefully draw people in who will support us in that. But that's just, one aspect of how a community grows and develops.
Right. Our community certainly has a lot more religious institutions than it did 25 years ago, and I think it seems to me that certainly has impacted on the non-religious institutions in our community.
It has, but it's interesting.
Interesting.
We have many more, as you said, religious institutions, whether they be synagogues or Beit Midrash, houses of study, or whatever they might be. Probably by a scale of 50% more today than we had 20 years ago, and we had a fair number 20 years ago.
Right.
What is also interesting, though, is that the rate of affiliation has not grown relative to the overall size of the community. It's been fairly constant, the percentage of those who affiliate at any given time. So what that says to me is, on the one hand, it's great that there's more choice, and people can find their way, and hopefully will stay more engaged because they have something that's more valuable to them personally. But on the other hand, we're still not out there yet as successful and as broad as we need and should be at drawing people in. So it's a mixed blessing, and it's a double-edged sword too.
The next 10, 15 years will be really interesting to sit and watch what happens.
Yeah, we'll look at it from our wheelchairs in the home.
Yeah,
see how it
listen.
goes.
So what is there about you that nobody knows? That's one of our questions. Is there something about yourself that you think no one knows?
That I think nobody knows.
Yeah, right.
Mm,
That you still haven't put away those boxes from when you moved here? I could tell that on the tape.
uh, no, I don't think my personal organizational style is something that people need to know about. Well, that I aspired in my youth to be the next Sandy Colfax. You know,
Okay.
I always
Really?
wanted that. That would have been my first love. You know, to
Uh-huh.
be I'm left-handed somewhat. I'm
Mm.
Jewish. I was a pitcher. All those things. I wanted to be Jewish. I wanted to be the next Sandy Colfax.
Okay.
And and also I used to have dreams of and enjoy comedy, and thought of becoming a comedian at one point.
Oh, what an opening.
Yeah, don't go there, Kathy.
Okay, I won't. Is there anything you wanted that we didn't cover that you would like, really and truly, for the tape, for the posterity, for your girls, for your grandchildren, or whatever?
Well,
This, day in the life of Rick Meyer.
whether it be for my girls or my son or for my wife or my family, they'll decide if they want to take a look at this. No,
Right.
I think it's a great project that you're doing, and that the Historical Society is involved in. I think it's important for our community. It's a good model, and it's fun to reminisce and
It
to
is.
share. And I don't look and the reason I don't have anything in particular to add as either a legacy statement or
Right.
something in perpetuity
but
is
you did.
because I still feel like I'm part of that process moving forward.
That's
And I
nice.
don't want to, I don't want to accept implicitly what that might mean if I make that kind of a
Yeah.
20-year out statement. So
Mhm.
happy to be here and do what I'm doing.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank
Very
you,
nice.
Kathleen.
Very nice. Interesting. So you were